Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Live Better Longer, 5 Breakthroughs Changing Aging, a webinar brought to you by the American Federation for Aging Research, Prevention, and Age of Majority. I'm Sarah Smith, the editor-in-chief of Prevention, a health and wellness magazine that is doing great for its age, which is 73, because I and everyone who works here gets to learn something new every day. That's why I love partnering with AFAR on our Live Better Longer series, because I get to chat with leading experts to learn about what's going on in the field of aging. Please know, though, that, of course, these conversations are educational. We are not your doctor. So please, you can talk to them about anything that you might want to change about your healthcare. We're able to be here today because of some important partnerships. AFAR is a leader in supporting research into healthy aging. Prevention, as I mentioned, has a long history of bringing the latest health advice and thinking to a broad audience. And Age of Majority is a company doing great work to debunk myths and stereotypes around aging. I'm so pleased today to be talking with Steve Austad, AFAR's Senior Scientific Director, who holds prestigious positions with the University of Alabama at Birmingham and the Nathan Schock Centers of Excellence. He's also the author of the terrific book, Methuselah's Zoo, which we spoke about on another webinar, and I highly recommend. So Steve, welcome. I'm so glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, it's nice to chat with you again, Sarah.
So Steve, before we get started really talking about the specific breakthroughs, I would love for you to give us all some context. As I was reading about the things that we're going to go through today, I was thinking, wow, I mean, maybe I'll live to be 100. Maybe my son is going to live to be 120. It's really amazing. But do you think we're at a particular turning point in aging research, or are we at a more steady progression? Is it both? Give us some context.
No, I think we're at a tipping point, as they say. The tipping point is that in the last 10 or 15 years, we've come up with literally dozens of ways to make experimental animals stay healthy longer and live longer. And what the tipping point that we're at is we're starting to now try out these things in humans to see which of them actually work in humans as they work in animals. And, we've had some of these things like dietary restriction. We've known this has made experimental animals stay healthy longer for 70 years, but we've never actually, we've tried to extend it to humans. But the one thing we found out is that humans can't do what mice can do. Mice or rats in a cage, if you want to feed them 30 or 40% less than they want to eat, yeah, you can do that. It's no problem because they have no choice. You just give them this much food. Humans, even if we pay them a great deal of money and make them, give them counseling and everything, they can't quite keep that kind of long-term diet. So, but now we're at a new point. We're at a new point where we have some things that we are pretty sure are going to work, and we're ready to try them out in humans. And in fact, some of those early trials are already underway.
That's really exciting. Okay, so let's dive in and talk specifically about some of these things that are, really starting to change the field. So the first one for us to talk about is our understanding of senescent cells. And you can tell me if I said it wrong, because I have a wide vocabulary from reading, but not always from talking. So tell us first what these are and how do they affect our health in a general way?
Sure. These senescent cells are those that used to replicate because tissues need to be repaired and renewed, but they've run out of the amount of cell division that they can do, and so that they're no longer capable of dividing. And initially, when these cells were discovered, and they were discovered in dishes, they assumed that they would die at that point, but they don't, and that's the problem because they just sit there. And they start oozing these very damaging chemicals. And so from being well-behaved cells that help rejuvenate our tissues and all, suddenly they become damaging cells. And that's why they're called senescent cells. Senescence is just another word for aging, really.
So what do we know then about repairing them?
So for the longest time, it was a mystery. We know that even in the oldest people, senescent cells form a very small fraction of all the cells in their body. And the mystery was always, well, could these really be having any, detrimental impact on our health if they're so rare? And what it was discovered was that, yes, these things that they ooze actually damage the surrounding tissue. And in fact, it can even convert some of the surrounding cells to senescent cells themselves. So they have a far greater impact than you would expect if you only knew the raw numbers. The other thing that we've discovered is that cells that don't really divide ever, like the cells that make your brain, your heart muscle, and all, they can also show the same characteristics of senescence. That is, they can reach a stage where they no longer perform their function well, but they start to ooze these damaging chemicals. So we found out that that they're far more widespread than we thought.
So can you talk a little bit about how we know this now?
Well, we started knowing everything from looking at cells in a dish.
Okay.
And for the longest time, it was a question, do these things even exist in living animals? And then about 15 years ago, people found some markers, some ways to do it. So then they could look at those markers in mice, for instance, and say, aha, yeah, we see that this blue marker, one of the markers is a bright blue dye, right? We can see these organs gradually turning bluer as they get older. And then some people started looking at skin biopsies from humans and all and found, yeah, those cells are actually in there. And then we found some other ways to identify them besides this blue marker as well.
So what's the significance then of identifying them? And then what do we think we can do to them? Are we trying to not have them? Are we trying to keep them?
Well, we can't really.
What are we doing?
Yeah, we can't really prevent them from accumulating. They accumulate with age. But once we were able to identify them, it became possible to ask, well, can we find drugs or chemicals that will kill them? Because one of the things that happens when they reach this stage is that a lot of your cells in your body are killed all the time. It's a normal process that cells at a certain point will commit suicide. These cells, though, are very resistant to all of the signals that say, kill yourself, kill yourself. So once we could identify them, though, we could start to try to find chemicals that preferentially kill those cells, but not the healthy cells around them. And we've now discovered a handful of chemicals that do that very effectively in mice. And when we do that, we've discovered that, in fact, it improves the mouse's health in multiple ways. So that's why it's so exciting.
What are some of the ways? Does it make them younger? Does it slow down their aging? What is it?
It kills them. It kills them. And so then they're replaced by healthy cells that the cells around them will make. So the nice thing about these chemicals, to the extent that they also work in people, and there are a whole bunch of early stage human trials underway, is that it takes these cells a while to accumulate, which means that let's imagine that we have this therapy that we say, okay, you take this pill and it kills 70% of your senescent cells. Well, you don't have to keep taking that pill every day, because you can wait for them to begin accumulating again. And so this might be something where you're getting your youth prolonging therapy once every few weeks or every few months.
Do you think that that's something that's really coming soon-ish for people to be able to kill these cells?
Yes. Last time I checked, there were more than 40 early stage clinical trials of these drugs that kill these cells. Now, those clinical trials are not for prolonging aging, they're for fighting diseases, because that's the first place that we're going to see some of these anti-aging therapies come. People are going to say, can they prevent this disease, or can they slow the progression of these diseases? So it'll probably be quite some time before we actually know if they can keep a healthy person healthy But what we'll know far beyond that, before that, is whether they can slow down or even possibly reverse the course of some very serious diseases.
Are they directly associated with specific diseases, or is it that they're present when there are these events?
No, they seem to be quite general, but there are specific diseases that we know are due to senescent cells.
Huh.
And so those are the first diseases that we want to address.
That's fascinating. And that we'd be going in to kill a certain kind of cell, but leaving the others in a safe way.
Right. And with the right kind of drug delivery, we might be able to deliver this drug just to the part of the body that you want it to, maybe just to your lung or just to your liver or just to your brain. So, there's also a lot of progress going on in sophisticated drug delivery, which is not, it's one thing to have the drug. It's another thing to get it to the right place at the right time.
Right. So a lot of things have to happen and come together, but you're really seeing that starting to happen.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Okay, so I want to talk about cells in another context now. So I think there's some research showing the possibility of reprogramming cells. Can you tell us what that means and how it's different from the senescent cell situation?
Sure. It's very, very different. So, we all started off life as this little bundle of cells, of embryonic stem cells. And it was those cells that eventually transformed into all of the cells of our body. So when we were a very small clump of several hundred cells, some of those were these embryonic stem cells. And from those cells, everything in our body arose. And for the longest time, people were interested in, well, could those cells be used to help us fight off aging? Well, it turns out in about 15 years ago now, it was discovered that we could turn any cell in our bodies into an embryonic stem cell-like cell by giving it a certain cocktail of chemicals, the same cocktail that made them embryonic stem cells in the first place. And what that means is that we could take a skin cell or a blood cell, or a kidney cell, and reduce its age back to zero. If you think about it, that's pretty remarkable. And there are all kinds of therapies that are likely to come out of that. But what we've discovered in the meantime is that if we give, let's say, a mouse a certain dose of these cocktails, and we do it periodically, what it does is it partially turns some of the cells back into a more embryonic or youthful state. And now they've done that such that they've done some remarkable things. In one case, they rejuvenated a nerve that usually in adulthood, there's certain nerves will not regenerate. So they did this cell regeneration in the mouth with a optic nerve of a mouse. Normally, you cut that nerve and the mouse is blind forever after. But with giving it this cocktail of cells, that nerve actually regenerated itself and restored some of the vision. They've also given this to some mice just to see if they lived longer. One of the more recent papers, they did this to mice that were the equivalent of about 70 human years, which was, 22, 23 months for a mouse. And the ones that got this partial reprogramming lived twice as long as the animals that didn't get that. So that's pretty remarkable.
That is. So that's really interesting that they lived twice as long. So in one example, you were talking about fixing eyesight or something that we would have thought couldn't be fixed. And in another, they just lived long. There wasn't necessarily a one obvious thing that they were fixing. Is that?
Well, for mice almost all die of cancer. So what they were doing was that they were preventing the development of cancer. Now, I have to say, this is in a very early stage. This is not as advanced as the senescent cell therapies. There are some, because anytime you start making a cell a more generalist cell, you're toying with the possibility that you could turn that cell into a cancer cell. which is that kind of general cell. So this is not ready for prime time, not even close to prime time, but it's very provocative that if we can come up with the right cocktail, the right timing, that this could be even a more rejuvenating kind of therapy than with the senescent cells. But it's in very early stages, but there's a tremendous amount of work going on in this area, because this would be huge if it were extended to humans.
Right. It sounds so. I wonder if, knowing that it's very early, do we have any sense yet? I mean, is this kind of reprogramming something that you could do indefinitely to a cell, or is it always going to carry that risk of turning it into maybe a cancerous cell or something dangerous? I mean, or can it just not take it at a certain point? I mean, are we going to live forever?
Well, I mean, there's more to our bodies than just our cells. There's our bones, there's our tendons, there's our ligaments. But it certainly has the possibility of keeping us healthy substantially longer. We don't know how many times you could do this too. So we have no reason to think that you can't do this numerous times, but we don't know that yet. And we also have to figure out, well, how can we do this without increasing the danger that we're going to have these side effects, like increasing the cancer rate that would be really awful. And that's why this research is probably going to go a little slower than the work on the senescent cells, because of the drugs that they're using for the senescent cells. And I don't want to really mention them because I don't want people to run out and start trying them out. Those are drugs that we know don't have much in the way of side effects, a number of them. These you have to be very, very careful with. So we have a lot of work to do. But on the other hand, if this pans out, it could be quite literally earth-shaking.
Right. So a lot of careful work coming, but for a very potentially huge breakthrough. Amazing. Okay. So our next breakthrough, I'm not going to lie, made me think a little bit of vampires, because it's about how young blood can rejuvenate damaged organs in older adults, animals, in the case of the research again. So you are here to reassure me that, of course, nobody is drinking anybody's blood. So tell me what's actually going on here with this research on young blood.
Yeah, this is probably the one that I think has the most promise in the near future. And so the way that they discovered this is they basically hooked the circulation of a young mouse to the circulation of an old mouse so that their blood was mixing. And what they found when they did that is that the old mouse suddenly looked much younger. Its organs looked much younger. Its heart looked much younger. Its brain and its muscles looked much younger. The downside of that was the young mouse suddenly looked older. Now, and they've subsequently done it where they just did a transfusion of plasma, let's say, from an old mouse to a young mouse, making it young mouse older, and the vice of making the old mouse younger. So now so we do transfusions all the time. I mean, we've been doing that for years. I've been trying to convince my students that, you know how much people will be willing to pay for blood for people that are 20 years old? The interesting thing is, right now, we're not entirely sure if there's some magic chemical or group of chemicals in the young blood that's responsible for the rejuvenation, or whether there's some damaging chemicals in the old blood. And what we're doing is we're simply diluting those out. And there's some evidence for both. And as we figure the thing is, even before we figure it out, there's the possibility of getting these transfusions. And I'm thinking, yes, it sounds kind of vampiric. But on the other hand, it wouldn't surprise me if 10 years from now, every time people donate blood, they don't just put their blood type on it, but they put their age on it. And it could be, I mean, if we can identify the chemicals, and if it's chemicals in young blood, then we could just dispense with the whole transfusion business. But again, we know a lot about transfusing blood. There are very serious scientists doing very serious clinical trials for a number of, again, of diseases from this right now. But I think because it's something that we do all the time anyway, that this shows just a great deal of, it also doesn't violate any aspect of biology that I know. I could imagine that older organs are producing some kind of toxic, waste products that accumulate in the blood and that our kidneys don't filter out, but that if we diluted those things out, they would be healthier for everything, because your is thing ultimately. On the other hand, if there are some magical chemicals in young blood, and that would be, I guess that would be plausible as well, that there are some things in young blood that help keep organs young until bad things start accumulating in the blood later in life. So the logic of this is one that makes so much biological sense to me that I have some great hopes for it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So you're saying if the researchers can identify that it's the chemicals, that they could then create just those chemicals and just dispense with the whole blood part of it, really. Right.
And early on, there was a thought that they'd identified one chemical, but hasn't really panned out so well. So they're still working on that. My thought is, it's if it is the young blood and not the lack of old blood, that it's likely to be a cocktail. And I simply say that because I think if it were something simple, we would have found it already, because people have been looking very intensely for it.
Right. And we're so comfortable with blood transfusions in general in our culture, happens all the time, that you would think if it were, super straightforward, we might know even more. I mean, of course, it's never been done as a trial until now, that taking,
right,
because we don't know the age of the blood that people are getting.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in graduate school, I gave plasma, and I think I got $50 every time I did it or something. But now people are paying thousands of dollars, because there are people in these clinical trials that are getting these kinds of transfusions all the time.
That is fascinating. I see a future with all kinds of interesting things happening in that world. But we're talking, the mice are improving in overall health, or we're targeting specific areas of the body, or disease? What did you say?
It seems like every organ that's been looked at has been improved by this kind of mixing of young and old blood in the old animals.
So what is still the barrier then to treatment, to just people trying to do this themselves? That sounds horrifying, but why isn't this a treatment now?
There was a company already that started doing this commercially, and the FDA got on them, and I think they're out of business now. It's too preliminary. And getting a transfusion when you need one, for some, for instance, you had surgery and you needed that's one thing. But getting regular transfusions of blood, every time you get a transfusion, there's a small chance of something untoward happening. So I think we have to be a lot more certain of this. But I think this is something that's going to come fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've often seen, when there's a blood drive, that there's, a critical need. And I can't imagine, taking from the critical need for, something that's critical. So I suppose there's that issue too.
That is, of course, that would not be a problem if college students were getting paid several $1,000s to donate some plasma.
Yeah. If everyone under 25 were getting paid to do it, we wouldn't really have a shortage. Okay, let's talk about rapamycin now. So can you first give us a background on what the drug is? And also, if you could tell us where metformin fits in here, since I know that's often a buzzword in aging.
Sure. So there are a variety of 6 or 8 drugs that have been shown to increase longevity and prolong health in mice. The one that's had the most robust effects, that's been studied the most, is a drug called rapamycin. And rapamycin is already used in the clinic under fairly limited circumstances. It's, if anybody has a a stent in their coronary artery. That stent is these days is typically embedded with this, because one of the things that metformin does, rapamycin, one of the things that rapamycin does is very good at preventing cell division. And one of the problems with stents is that cells grow over the stents and they close off the artery again. It's also used as part of an immunosuppressive cocktail when people get a kidney transplant, because a lot of the chemotherapeutic agents are pretty toxic to the kidneys, and it's not. And it's also used in some chemotherapy cocktails as well. But what we found in mice is it has I've told several journals of all the things that we know very well it does in mice, and they said, that sounds like science fiction. So it makes them live longer. There have been more than a dozen studies, and they all find the same thing. It actually prevents mouse versions of Alzheimer's disease. You can give mice a caricature of Alzheimer's disease, and it slows down the progression and delays the onset of Alzheimer's disease. It also does the same for progeria, this disease that people get, that's accelerated aging disease. We know that the genetics of that disease, so it's easy for us to do it in mice. And when we do that, the mice stay healthy longer when we do it. It delays several cancer types in mice. It entirely prevents some types of cancers. It prevents atherosclerosis and later life heart failure. It improves vaccine response. Now, this is one of the things that's actually been found in people as well. There's been a small trial where they took originally they took old mice, gave them a dose of rapamycin, and then gave them a flu vaccine, and found out that the older mice responded as well as young mice typically do. And there was a similar study in humans where they gave people a dose of rapamycin, and they waited older people 65 and older, and then they gave them a flu injection and found out they mounted a greater antibody response. Rapamycin has even been shown to prevent periodontal disease, believe it or not, in mice. Yeah. So this is just remarkable.
Yeah, very, almost like a little miracle. So
yeah. And we've known this for quite some time. There are a few human trials. There's been a real hesitancy by the medical community to adopt this because it's already used in the clinic, and it's used when people have cancer and transplants and all. There's some known side effects, and that has put the medical community off. But those were in doses that were therapeutic, not doses that were necessarily for the prolongation of health. We don't know if this would work in the same way in people that it works in mice. It may or may not, but I think we ought to find out. Now, there's already an informal group of people who are dosing themselves with rapamycin. They're getting their doctor to prescribe them rapamycin for something or other. So, that's one of the things we don't know, but its effects in mice are absolutely earth-shaking. Now, metformin is interesting because it's another drug that attacks processes that go on inside the cells. Unlike the senescent cells that you're trying to kill a cell, you're trying to change its internal chemistry. Metformin, which is, of course, the most popular type 2 diabetes drug in the world, is not shown to have a really big effect in mice, but in humans, because millions of humans have taken metformin for 60 years. And there was one study that showed that the people taking metformin because they were to control their diabetes were actually living longer than the people matched for age and socioeconomic status and all that were non-diabetic. And so that was really quite earth-shaking. And because metformin, we know so much about its safety, it's a very, very safe drug. There's a lot of interest in doing a large clinical trial with metformin to see if there's some observational epidemiology, that is, this group of people were taking metformin and this group of people were not, that shows that it seems to prevent cancer and coronary artery heart diseases and dementia. But again, these are observational studies. They're not experiments. And there's all kinds of reasons to interpret those with a great deal of caution. Observational studies were what made estrogen look like the wonder drug of the 1990s. And then when we did a proper clinical experiment, turned out it was a lot more complicated than that. But metformin is very, very interesting. The problem with getting a metformin trial has been that because it's off patent, it's as cheap as aspirin, nobody stands to make any money. So it's been hard to find the funding for that. But there's about another half dozen drugs that in mice have shown the promise of rapamycin. The interesting thing about them, and this may be the thing that aging biology contributes to medicine that's brand new, is that most of those only work in one sex. And that is something that's brand new, and it's shocked everybody. And to the extent that that turns out to translate to humans, it means that we may soon start personalizing medication by sex. And so far, that pretty much hasn't happened, but it's something that really deserves some looking into.
That sounds so unusual. That would be a whole other way of thinking about what people are taking, right? Like a person diabetic who's a woman versus, or just any people, right? You're saying,
right.
Yeah.
Right. And people are talking now about personalized medicine, that you would get this kind of medication for your cancer if you had this genetic makeup at all. I think the first place this is going to come into medicine is right here. Differences between men and women, biology.
I mean, right. When you say it like that, of course, it makes sense. I mean, there's been a lot of breakthroughs in understanding, and that women aren't just like smaller men, right? And years, right? It's a whole different biology.
And men aren't just shorter lived women.
Right. Well, before we actually go on to the next one, because there's already been some questions about this topic, and I thought let's just address a couple of them right now, and we can always come back, audience, to more questions about this. But the safety issue, you said some people are already starting to take metformin in particular. A lot of people take metformin, right? But are there people taking rapamycin now? Okay, so
there's an informal study group of about at least 300, 400 people that are doing this.
So, as we said at the beginning, we are not giving medical advice, but when someone talks to their doctor about this, what is that conversation? Would you discourage it? You as someone who's like looking at the research and the fact that there hasn't been a trial, but also that it's so promising, is it something, what should people?
I would not advocate. I would discourage people from trying anything that hasn't had a proper clinical trial.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who are so invested in their long life and health that they're willing to take risks that most of us would not be willing to take. And there certainly are risks. So I would say to people, look, talk to your doctor. If your doctor doesn't recommend doing something, don't do it.
Right.
But again, people have their own priorities.
Well, why do you think, could you explain why, from your perspective, clinical trials are so important for patient safety? Because I think we hear a lot about them. They sound very exciting, but what is their function in terms of our safety?
Particularly, they're first of all to see what levels of drugs are toxic, right? And the other thing is their long-term effects that may not be obvious early on. So it may be that you're taking this drug and it's fine to take it for a year, but if you take it for year after year after year, clinical trials are really the best way that we have to tell if a drug is safe and effective at whatever it's supposed to do. And there's really no shortcut, just like men and women are different biologically, mice and people are different biologically. And just because something has a really robust benefit in a mouse does not mean that it's going to have the same benefit in people. We're very much more successful at curing cancer in mice than we are at people. More than 90% of the clinical trials of drugs that were effective in mice fail in people. And that's something to keep in mind, right?
Yeah, that's an important reminder. right. And this is all very exciting stuff, but I'm glad that you put that in perspective there for us.
Yeah.
Let's, for our last breakthrough that we're going to talk about before we take more questions, is something that's more accessible and safe for a lot of people, which is intermittent fasting, time restricted eating. And I know that this is fascinating to a lot of people from a weight loss perspective, but there are some amazing breakthroughs related to health span too, right? So what do you think is most exciting about this research?
I think the most exciting, so we've known for a long time that reducing calorie intake has all these benefits in many species, not just mice. What we're not sure of at this point, even though we've been studying this for years, is whether the benefits are because of its effect on weight loss or whether there's something else. We used to think that what you needed to do to get the benefits of this diet was to keep doing it day after day, month after month, year after year. And people can't do that. We've had several human trials now, and it doesn't matter. You could pay people $100,000 a year. They cannot stay on a 30% less calorie diet. But for those of us who worked with animals for a long time, one of the things that I should have noticed earlier, and I didn't, somebody else did, is that when you're restricting these animals and you go in to feed them every day, they're hanging on the cage bars waiting for you, and they gobble up all their food just right away. And so we weren't just feeding the animals less. What we were doing is we were also making them fast for about 23 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And someone finally thought, well, maybe it's not the calories themselves. Maybe it's the fasting that's the important thing here. And there is this whole fasting physiology that if you don't eat for 8 or 10 or 12 hours, your body starts to change the way it works. It starts to turn on a lot of protective processes and all. So out of that, and out of some very promising work with mice, came the idea that maybe the important thing was to have a period of fasting. And now there are all these diets that have come about that are various ways of enforcing a certain level of fasting. Some of them ask you to fast for a day or two each week. Some of them just say, well, eat all you want, but eat it in a restricted amount of time. And if you do that, then the rest of the time you're fasting. Those are proving very effective for weight loss. And the most important thing is this is stuff that people can do. Yeah. You know, people can eat from 10 in the morning to 6 at night, and that's it. And it may have dramatic benefits beyond weight loss. You know, one of the things that we don't know from the animal studies is the effect of this restriction because it's effect of making mice less obese, or is it the extreme leanness? You know, we really don't know. There were 2 primate studies, one of which sort of did the reduced obesity to healthy body weight, and those showed a big impact on survival. Another one took healthy body weight and restricted there, and there were some benefits, but there was no longer life. There was, there were some health benefits. So it's not entirely clear what this is doing, but the fasting physiology, it's already been shown in mice, for instance, to help mice recover from major surgery faster and be less likely to die. And it's also been shown to help some people recover from the nausea and all the side effects of chemotherapy. So, there's a great deal of promise here. It's something that we can do. It's probably going to be a while before we can identify whether it has these massive general health benefits or not. But people can do it.
Yeah, right. Especially if, as you described, the 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. eating. Is there, because there's a lot of ways that people can try, intermittent fasting. Is there one that you've seen in the research that seems the most either effective or effective plus doable,
I think it's early days. Okay. There's all these approaches to doing it. I think it's early days. I mentioned that one because it's one I do actually, but I don't do, I was doing this long before people started studying this. It was my daily routine. I don't eat breakfast. I eat a kind of a brunch and I eat dinner. So I was very pleased. It's like if you'd been taking metformin for years and then you heard about the metformin effects, how pleased you would be.
Right.
But yeah, is that preferable to fasting entirely for 24 hours, a time or two a month? I don't know. We'll find out though. But the fact is that people can do it. If all it does is reduce obesity, that will have an enormous health impact by itself.
Right. Of course, that is correlated to so many other issues, right? So solving that would solve some other issues. We were talking about eating here. Could you also address exercising, even though there's not like one big breakthrough here? Because I feel like they often go hand in hand when people talk about just living a healthier lifestyle. Is there, what do we know about the benefits of exercise on aging?
I think there has been something of a breakthrough here. The breakthrough is that we keep discovering more and more benefits of exercise. And the things that we didn't realize 10 years ago is how good exercise is for preserving the brain, for staving off dementia and normal cognitive decline. But there are even things now called myokines that are things your muscle produces that seem to be beneficial. So your muscles are, in certain sense, like a hormone organ. And I often call it physical activity instead of exercise, just because people think of exercise as you're dripping sweat and you're exhausted and all. Well, that is a kind of exercise, but just a good moderate walk is also exercise, and people tend to forget that. And I know there are people who hate to sweat, but they could still benefit from moderate exercise, but doing it regularly. And like I say, we're discovering more and more and more benefits of this. But I think the muscle lung brain connection is something that few of us suspected, but now there's just abundant evidence.
Well, that's great, especially with the way that you're and explaining that it's really not just about that word exercise. Because we find that in prevention too, that sometimes exercise feels like, okay, that's the thing you do for 30 minutes and you sweat a lot and maybe you have to go to the gym and forget it. Right. But really, isn't it better to be moving more in general throughout the day? I don't know if there's specific aging brain related research on that, but that's what we tend to recommend in prevention. Go for it, and then later go for another short one. Don't just sit all day after you burned some calories.
Yeah, some people are saying sitting is the new smoking.
Yeah.
Right.
So after this, we're all going to get up and walk around. Okay. Okay. So before we get to questions from more questions from the audience, you've mentioned clinical trials. We've talked about exciting things happening. And are there ways that any of us here today can get involved in that kind of thing to help this research and maybe benefit?
Well, that's quite interesting. Yeah, there are places on the NIH website that list clinical trials. My thought is that the best thing, if you're interested in getting one of these clinical trials, is to find out the researchers that are involved in them and see if you're eligible. And one of the things about clinical trials is that they all have eligibility criteria. It might be that you need to be in a certain age range or not be taking these medications or something. But certainly things like the TAME trial, which is the metformin trial that people are recruiting from, that's well known. AFAR has been very involved in advocating for that trial, and certainly contacting AFAR would be one way to get connected with people that are running that trial. But for the others, I'd say the best thing to do would be to go online, look for the trials, and to find out who's running them, and then volunteer for them.
Well, that's great. I think that's just such a good reminder that we can be volunteering for it. We don't have to wait for people to necessarily find us.
Right.
I'm going to take some questions from our audience, and there's an interesting one that's sort of the big picture about the field, and the question is that sometimes ideas of longevity and health are intertwined. So do you see this field of aging research trying to help people live longer, shorten the time of ill health? Is it both?
Yeah, I think that we usually talk about living longer as a kind of shorthand for what we really mean, which is staying healthy longer. But it's likely that if we come up with ways to keep people healthy longer, they will live longer. What we would really like to do is make people live longer, and when they eventually die, to die with virtually no period of ill health. And my thought is, if we could keep people healthy closer to the end of their lives, that would be a tremendous help, even if they didn't live longer. So I think increasing health, prolonging health, that's really what we're all about. It's just that it's quite often easier to talk about longer life because it takes less explanation, but it's really longer health that the field is really pursuing.
Okay, and this is sort of related. That's helpful. So are these potential therapeutics, are they going to be targeting the biology of aging or the symptoms of aging?
No, that's a key distinction. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's really targeting the biology of aging. And the good thing about that, the real benefit of this, and this is a whole new style of thinking about health and medical intervention, is that if you target the biology of aging, what you really are doing is potentially preventing or delaying all of the problems of aging at the same time. Whereas if you treat the symptoms of aging, you can say, well, what if we can just delay people getting cancer? Well, that would be great, but then that's going to mean more people will get heart disease, and if we cured heart disease, well, that just means more people will get dementia and cancer and all, because you're only dealing with one thing at a time. If you target the biology of aging, which underlies all these things, plus many, many more, muscle weakness, osteoporosis, arthritis, all those things, then potentially with a single approach, you can play these things as a group. And that would be the most massive health benefit that we could offer.
Right. I'm going to go back to some specific questions about the specific breakthroughs we talked about. So the senescent cells, what are some of the common diseases that they cause? I think maybe you mentioned that there were some that were related. And is cancer in this discussion?
Cancer is in the discussion. So this is what's interesting, is there's been so much interest in this across the National Institutes of Health, not just the people who study aging, but the people who study all these diseases, that the NIH has just started a $130 million enormous network of program to actually map where all of the senescent cells in the body is. There are specific diseases like idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis that are very clearly associated with cell senescence. But as far as we know, even things like dementia, cardiac disease, a whole bunch of things could be associated with cells. Now that we can identify them better and better, and we're actually working to identify better and better markers, because there are some markers that work good on some cell types and not so well on other types. So yes, cancer is in the conversation. All the diseases, arthritis. One of the first trials is going to no doubt be an arthritis trial. So anything because one of the things that senescent cells do is they cause inflammation, and inflammation is at the basis of so many of the maladies of aging.
Right. That's a powerful thing to try to balance, right? The problematic chronic inflammation versus the helpful, right? So yeah. Okay. When we were talking about rapamycin, you brought up personalized medicine, starting now, maybe being more part of our future. Do you think that how people take the medicine or take the treatment matters? Like, Is it a pill? Is it an injection? Can you get it from food? Is that going to be part of what is being studied?
That's probably not it. That is, people will get the medication in the way that it's best delivered. And by that, I mean the way that it can best get to the tissue in the least invasive way. Nobody wants to get a shot every day if they can take a pill every day. However, what I think we are going to be looking into is there a best time of the day to take your medicine? Most of our genes are turned off and on a daily rhythm, but yet we don't really think of getting your chemotherapy, let's say, at 8 a.m. rather than at 2 p.m. It's whenever you can manage to get your appointment. But it may turn out that there's a best time of day to take virtually any medication, but we haven't really investigated that very well. Usually medications we want you to take them this many times a day, and okay, it's best to take them with a meal, but nobody's really thinking about, well, this should be taken after 11 p.m., or this should really best be. But it wouldn't be at all inconceivable if it turned out there's a real best time of day to take your medication. And I think this is something, these biological clocks, which every cell in our body has, are going to be very much more important than we're thinking about them at this point.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting to think that, it could get that precise and personalized. Yeah. Okay, here's another one on thoughts on combining interventions. The question is about targeting more than one small molecule at a time or concurrent therapies.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite likely that multiple interventions, multiple therapies will be more effective, because it may be that this therapy attacks this part of the biology of aging, but not this other part of the biology of aging. And it may be, I mean, one of the things we don't study in our animal models, but it may be that this is good for you if you exercise, but not if you don't exercise. And this is good if you don't exercise, but if you do. So there's that kind of multiple therapeutics as well. What else do you do in your life? And does that matter? Because it very likely could. If you want to get big muscles, you want to take this therapy, but stay away from that therapy.
Right. All right. I think we're just about time to wrap up here. But if you could just send us off with just something, I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, and you could repeat something that you said, but what are you most excited and optimistic about as we go forward?
Well, I'm most excited about the fact that we're finally starting to try all the things that we know work so well in animals out in people. And I think that some of them are going to fail, but we can't be discouraged, because we know that, progress takes a lot of failure. You need a lot of failure to get a success. But once we get this success, it's going to change everything. Once we have an intervention that really targets the biology of aging, we're looking at least 10 to 20 more healthy years. That's going to affect social relations, economic, everything in life in a good way, I would say. And that's likely to happen, within our lifetimes. And that's, I think, something that nobody else in human history is likely to have thought about.
That is very exciting. And I look forward to talking to you more, Steve, as these things, develop, and we can look back on this one and say, gosh, remember when that was just a mouse trial? And here we are, with talking about taking it ourselves. So
it's always a joy to talk to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who joined us today for this really great session. Please, this is a regular series that we do, Live Better Longer, and you can follow AFAR and Prevention on social media to keep up to date. And as always, please check out afar.org, because it's a terrific organization that's doing great work and can always use our support. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy your afternoon.